right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining, either in person or online. My name is Zach Parrish. I'm the programming librarian here at the Bexley Public Library. This is our third year doing a Toni Morrison celebration around Toni Morrison Day. Toni Morrison Day is an official holiday in the state of Ohio. It is celebrated on February 18th, which is Toni Morrison's birthday. We are celebrating a little bit early because last year we had an awesome program on Sunday where we were able to have an entire afternoon of local poets and authors share favorite passages, and we wanted to dedicate an afternoon to keep that format. So last year I kind of gave a quick Toni Morrison introduction, and I stepped on our first presenter, Vernell Bristow's introduction. So I'll try not to do that, but I do just want to share something to open up the conversation today. And this week I listened to the conversation between Toni Morrison and Angela Davis that was hosted at the New York Public Library. And Toni starts that conversation off by sharing a piece that she had framed that she kept in her guest restroom, which was a letter from a Texas penitentiary rejecting Paradise from their collection because they were afraid that it would break down, a threat of breakdown of institution with the people in the prison. So I just want to point that out. That conversation was wide-ranging, and they talked a lot about libraries and just why it's so important to read books that make us think critically, make us think about who we are as people and how we connect to each other in community. And Toni's literature specifically had such a way of exploring inner lives that so often go missed in books. So I just want to share the importance of being in a public library, why it's important to keep reading and to keep fighting for intellectual freedom to keep these books in libraries. Our first reader today is Valerie Boyer, who is a vocalist, musician, dancer, poet, activist, minister, historian, and most of all, an educator. In every space, she breathes knowledge. Born and raised in Galveston, Texas, Valerie was groomed in Southern hospitality and shares that kindness everywhere she goes. Her life's work reflects the Southern colloquialisms of her childhood and the tenacity of her adulthood. Valerie is an active member of the Ohio Black Expo and advocates of diversity for the state of Ohio. Valerie has taught social studies for years and is currently the School and Inclusive Community Programs Coordinator at Ohio History Connection. Valerie is a proud graduate of Howard University and resides in Columbus, Ohio. Please join me in welcoming Valerie Boyer.
Hey, y'all. As he named, my name is Valerie, and I made it in this beautiful weather, just like the rest of you all. I won't be before you long. That's not a Baptist colloquial. I actually do mean it. Ironically enough, I was going to mention the interview between Toni Morrison and Angela Davis, which is one of the first interviews that I get to see as a Howard University at that time student, as a part of our, so disclaimer, when you go to an HBCU, specifically Howard University, every class that you take is a Black history class, okay? Doesn't matter what the class is. So gym is not ever just gym, right? You're learning about like Black folks from the diaspora that have made major contributions to life and society when it comes to physical wellness. And psychology is not just psychology. You're looking at case studies from the civil rights movement. When you have a teacher older than the civil rights movement, a professor, that's what you get to do, right? And so you don't get to take really a psychology course or a journalism course or an English course without studying about the Howard alumna herself, Toni Morrison. Right? As well as the controversial tenured alumni professor, Angela Davis. And what I loved about not just their interview, but about all of their correspondence that at least we got to see, is that there is a constant search for identity it seems like, or wrestle with how we're defining identity. And honestly, Black women need Black women to be able to wrestle with identity. You don't get that luxury or that privilege in every space that this world has deemed us a part of, whether we ask for it or not. But it's something specifically about the interconnectedness of Black women and our ability to talk about the things that we can't talk about anywhere else that kind of create what Toni Morrison actually refers to as sanctuary, right? And so that is, yeah, that's my introduction until she comes to campus, not much after, which we will get to. I'm going to start by reading one of her more common poems, one of my faves. It is called Eve Remembering. I tore from a limb fruit that had lost its green. My hands were warmed by the heat of an apple. Fire red and humming. I bit sweet power to the core. How can I say what it was like? The taste just undid my eyes and led me far from the gardens planted for a child to wilderness deeper than any master's call. Now these cool hands guide once caressed. Lips forget what they have kissed. My eyes now pull their light. Better the summit to see. I would do it all over again. Be the harbor and set the sail, loose the breeze and harness the gale, cherish the harvest of what I have been. Better to summit the scale, better the summit to be. So, that is Eve Remembering by Toni Morrison. So, raise your hand if you've ever had to sit through a Black girl hair session. Shout out to the people who had the deep sigh in the room. It can range now, right? Like, you got the straightening comb version of it. You got what I call the braid inauguration day version of it, right? Which is its own type of ceremony. You have the introduction to grown folk conversation version of the conversation, and then you have the what I call the reconciling of girlhood conversation of it. There's a reconciliation that happens in a space that feels like you make peace with the fact that there are parts of you that don't need to grow up or don't want to, or a combination of these things, right? Ironically enough, while being deeply exposed, there's a vulnerability, but there's a preserving of innocence that's taking place. And the vulnerability of this Black girl hair session, where you may or may not be getting popped with brush, with comb, may be able to smell products 7 miles over, may or may not meet cousins that you don't really know how they cousins, but they called y'all cousins, so y'all cousins. Ironically enough, with all of these many pieces happening, that is one of the most innocent spaces that you see. And so it comes unadorned, which is one of Toni Morrison's poems as well. For me, felt like a response to what I would consider my inaugural Black girl hair session. I was a tomboy growing up. You ask my folks, I still am. I'm all right with that. And as sacred as Black girl hair sessions are, they also can be a little crazy, as you've heard. But it is in those sessions that you get the duality of it all. And so I am going to read 2 poems. One of them can be found in The Day God Saw Me as Black, as a liberation story. That's a book written by D. Danielle Thomas with commissioned poetry in there from your girl. And another one is that of her voice. So here we go. It comes unadorned, like a phrase, like refusal. Strong enough to cast a spell, it comes unbidden, like the turn of sun through hills or stars in will of song. The jeweled feet, the jeweled hair, the jeweled body of women dance the earth, arousing it to spring. Shoulders broad as the road bend to share the weight of years. Profiles breach the distance and lean toward an ordinary kiss, a bliss. It comes naked like a charm. So that's It Comes Unadorned. Scott Woods is in the room, y'all. And Scott Wood is often fussing, with good reason, at poets about making sure their stuff is printed out. And all I hear in my head right now is Scott fussing at me for reading this from a device and not having it on my phone. In my defense, I did print it out, and then I left it at church. So, there's that. I hope they leave those poems on the altar. So, but that's fine because we found it anyway. Too much of a good thing is always a bad thing. Bible school taught me that pastor and pusher could be one and the same. I was made an addict before I had permanent teeth. And eventually, I overdosed on church. They rushed me in, pumped my stomach, hell, fire, and brimstone spilled out. And all this time, I thought it was the Holy Ghost. Sundays felt so good. We looked so good. Venom tastes just like grape juice. Bondage can look like crushed wafers. Indulgence is so innocent until it isn't. Cash money deacons shouting barbiturates from hymnals felt so right until I watched turf wars take casualties between pews and knew I had to change. I never left God. I just needed to get clean. The first step to my detox was to avoid wash day and to stay home on a Sunday. And my symptoms were under control until my organs crashed. Fire spilled out. Being looked at in the mirror as someone I don't recognize, I'm still staring at the color, still staring at my head, still looking at my organs, frankly wondering if there's anything holy left. So that's that piece. So yeah, that is. You heard me mention the hair experience to that of Sanctuary. And I am not exaggerating. That is a very real thing that happens because church happens in there too. You get both in. You get turf wars and you get church. You figure out what kind of hairstyles you do like and nobody cares because they didn't really ask you. And you figure out what kind of people you do and don't like. And make a decision that when you're of a certain age, you're going to do something about it, right? It's all of that. It's all of that. And Toni Morrison, for me, not only in that interview do they get to explore identity, but she's kind of one of, I'll say, 4 persons that get to have discussions about spirituality or religion, I'll say, in Western world, in true, like, Black girl church practice, that give language to what it is that I felt like so many of us were experiencing, that complication of family and patriarchy and ritual and divine and human all mixed in there all together, right? And it's so brilliant in both the tenderness and the assuredness and the boldness that she unpacks it in. And so that is a huge, huge, huge influence of that in that way. I'm going to read one more Toni Morrison poem before shifting gears a bit, staying in this kind of vein of exploring identity that she invites us to do. This is called I Am Not Seaworthy. I am not seaworthy. Look how the fish mistake my hair for home. I had a life like you. I shouldn't be riding the sea. I am not seaworthy. Let me be earthbound, star-fixed, mixed with sun and smacking air. Give me the smile, the magic kiss, to trick little boy, death of my hand. I am not seaworthy. Look how the fish mistake my hair for my home. That is that piece. So another cool thing that like Toni Morrison is doing at the time, because the artists are always doing the cool things, especially the Black women artists. So if you don't trust Black women, you should, because we get it right the first time. 9.78 times out of 10. And what we don't get right the first time, we definitely get it on the second. So that's that on that. But she has locks. Now, he told y'all, I'm from Galveston, Texas, okay? And my folks are good Southern Black, the emphasis is on the Black there, though, Baptist folks, right? And so in terms of having access to culture, it's Southeast Texas, right? We get exposed to some of any and everybody. But it's a weird dichotomy because what you are hearing or being exposed to as goodness is not necessarily what you are seeing or being encouraged to have, right? And so seeing like a natural sister do her thing with fro and then locks and things of that nature is like lauded as this revered thing until that first time you come home from college and you've gone what my grandmother calls the natural, right? It can't even just be natural. It's the natural. We gotta add words that don't belong there. But Toni Morrison has already provided a rubric, a blueprint for how to navigate the complications of family when you are stepping into identity. I mean, for God's sakes, the woman is from Ohio. I don't know anybody who probably had more wrestling with identity as a Black woman than she did growing up in Ohio. That's not a knock. I'm saying Ohio and Texas, Ohio reminds me of home often, and no, that's not always a compliment. So this was one of those poems that helped me put some language and make it make sense. This is called The Perfect Ease of Grain. The perfect ease of grain, time enough to spill, the flavor of a woman carried through the rain, honey talk tongues, down home dreams, rushed by shapely prayer, evening lips part to hush, questions raised at dawn. The melon yields another slice. Fingers understand. Ecstasy becomes us all. Red cherries become jam, deep juvenile sleep, a whistle trace, white shorelines and green air, welcome doors held open when goodbye is so long. The poise of grain, time enough to spill, the flavor of a woman remembered on a train. So again, that is the perfect ease of grain. Because it's complicated, right? So, I am, wow, why is this a hard thing to say even in the year of our Lord 2025? It's fine, it's whatever. I didn't graduate from Howard in 4 years. That thing took some time and some money I didn't have, and some healing and some reconciling that even though that I had left Galveston, Galveston hadn't left me. So it was a journey. And when she comes to campus, I'm a senior the first time around. Because that bonus year is a real thing, okay? And I'm kind of cowering in the back of our class. It's an English class, but our professor, Dr. Dana Williams, invited us, those of us that she knew wrote or knew performed poetry, to come and hear and listen. And it's Toni Morrison. Duh, I wanna hear and I wanna see. But also I am deeply ashamed, y'all. Deeply ashamed, because what she told her was that she was inviting seniors. And so a part of her discourse is about how to look at what comes next as best as one can, and asking, when you graduate this year, what are your plans, right? Baby, you talking about embarrassed is how I felt in that moment. So I figured out like a place to kind of hide. You know, it ain't the back, but it ain't the front. I told y'all, I grew up black church, so I know how to hide in plain sight. Like, I can do this. Like, I intentionally, like, wore my hair half up, half down, and sat in between two people with really big hair that day. You know what I'm saying? So if your eyes were going to go to someone, it just wasn't going to be me. Or so I thought. I'm not really asking a whole bunch of questions. I'm doing like the proverbial head nod, enough to make sure that it looks like I'm paying attention, but also enough to not make eye contact, right? Like I really am, like so many black women, I have mastered the art of hiding in plain sight, and not being seen when I don't want to, but also not being seen when I'm trying to be, right? It's a real thing. And so this does not stop her from asking every single person in the room what their plans are after they graduate this spring semester, if they know. And then for a lot of them, I actually felt better for people who were graduating on time. She interrogated all of them. What are your plans? They name whatever they think next step is. That's interesting. Have you considered? And then like she throws like a whole philosophical Toni Morrison moment at them. You know what I'm saying? Where they're questioning everything. So now at least I'm not the only one in the room confused in that way. But she gets to me. It's like, what are your plans after this semester? And I'm like, well, I actually still have some classes to take. And she was like, that's why you didn't make eye contact with me when I was asking this other question at the beginning of, oh, come on, man. Embarrassed. Do you hear me? Embarrassed. She's like, what classes do you have left to take? So I told her like the 2 or 3 that I had. She was like, is that all you're gonna take? You got this extra year anyway. And I was like, no. I named all of the useless classes that I was gonna take to maintain my financial aid, right? Since I had the time anyway. She goes, this really seems to be a weight on you. I said, it is. She said, I can see that. And I'm like, okay, like in my head, like, where are we going with this? And then she moved on to the next person and just left me sitting with this open, acknowledged weight that I was wrestling with, that I'll be honest with y'all, I don't think prior to that moment for real, I had openly addressed it. I had talked about it with friends. I had talked about it with my best friend. I finally, what I thought was gonna be broke the news to my family, who gave very Southern comforting words. So, you know, those aren't necessarily comforting to everybody, but I let it eat at me. And I didn't have to. Because once it was said aloud, still embarrassed, but simultaneously relieved, if that makes sense. There was a weight that had lifted that made me feel like I didn't have to hide. Because I told y'all, I talked to my friends. I ain't talked to everybody though. I don't always like people like that. So as far as I was concerned, that wasn't everybody's business. I still feel that way, by the way. But once it was out there, what it did was gave me room to explore possibilities and interrogate something that I don't think if I had named aloud, I wouldn't have. So I did not know that she had my contact information. Year goes by, I graduate, I took the classes that I named. I took some pretty cool electives, but also took some what I consider useless ones, right? Well, maybe not useless to my field of profession. Like I took a Black diaspora and aquatic arts class. Yeah, I don't like swimming. There's nothing. I can, you know what I'm saying? But it's not what wakes me up in the morning. I took, what other useless, it's not useless. I took like a beginner's track course. I don't like running. I can, you know what I'm saying? If we're in trouble, I'm good. I'm not gonna run out of breath. But in that moment, it was just like, just need to graduate. But I graduated in 2017, and as I'm getting ready to leave, Dr. Williams asked me to stop by her office. So now my nerves are shot to hell because Dr. Williams does not call anybody in her office except for to tell them, I know you thought you passed, but it's like, just kidding. But no, she had a letter from me from Toni Morrison, who congratulated me upon graduating, upon finishing what I started. Use the language that she used. And there's a particular time, or a particular line that she named that reshaped how I look at time. She said, "You didn't graduate late. You graduated when the Creator designed for you to graduate, just on time for your destiny." Time is a funny thing anyway. Everyone thinks that you're supposed to be on it, but the truth is you're supposed to be in it. And in your time, in your way, you will do the things that you are supposed to. And if you don't, you'll change your mind and create something new, because that's what we do with this life as Black women. So, that letter has carried me. I don't just have the letter, I keep a picture of it. But it gave me a redefining moment to examine what time is. So I am going to do this piece about time, hopefully inviting you to consider time and destiny and all of these nice arbitrary words that don't really mean much when you're in the thick of it. And then I will be out of your way. Who decided how to tell time to do time's job? What entity of human was audacious enough to name themselves in authority and put stamp on how movement and transition could happen? Time has always spoken for itself. It didn't really need our help. It doesn't really need our advice. It always does what it wants to do anyway. Our grandparents said it this way: when that whole waiting thing happens, things may not come when you want them, but they always happen on time. Personally, I just think that was code for this is gonna be late as hell, but it's coming eventually. Time tells the ground when to produce elements and nutrients for people to eat, to drink, to take, to live in. Time Time tells the sky what color it's going to be based on the day and the location and who's looking at it. Time reaches in the cosmos and keeps creating these unique babies that grow up to be these unique humans that do all kinds of crazy things that we didn't think was in time's description. Time is an author that is just waiting on us to stop trying to write the plot. Time is a best friend, a hater, a kindness, a threat, all rolled into one. Time is what we're supposed to give ourselves even when we don't have it. Time is a gift. Time does not give us time to determine who or is not worthy of it. Time waits for no one except for when it's waiting for everyone. Time is always going to do time's job. Even when we change the job description, time does not discriminate. Time eats everybody. Time feeds everybody. Time takes from everyone. Time gives to everyone. Time is the thing that protected us from ourselves while we were discovering who we would emerge anew. Time has already met every version of us, those who came and those of us who are to come. Time knows what we look like even before we're going to. Time is a companion. Time is a guide. Time be chillin'. Time is along for the ride. Time is just that. Time is time. And when we accept that time is going to do whatever it wants to do, however it wants to do it, whenever it wants to do it, perhaps we will fight a little less and let time be what it truly is, what it already has cultured us to be. Time is glorious, much like the humans that it tends to lend itself to. So take your time. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you to Valerie Boyer. We're going to take about a 5-minute break, and we'll be back with Tiffany Lawson. All right. Our next reader this afternoon is Tiffany Lawson, who is a professional multidisciplinary artist born and raised on the south side of Columbus. From early beginnings of masterpieces scribbled behind her couch to community arts programs and summer camps, art has always been her nature. Literature, art, and music were anchors in her household, formulating ideas and an undeniable affinity for creativity. As a teenager, she began to realize her purpose as an artist after being exposed to local influences such as Amina Robinson, Grandpa Smokey Brown, and family, as well as Richard Duarte Brown, through programs her mother managed at the church across the street from their home. The programs broadened her access to an understanding of the arts. She was also mentored by Gilda Edwards. Through the use of the arts community and programs in Central Ohio, she honed her skills and developed her creative voice, shown locally and nationally. And I forgot to mention this up top, but for those joining us in person, she has a spread of artwork over here that you can check out between readers, all of the art influenced by Toni Morrison. So please join me in welcoming Tiffany Lawson.
Hey, y'all. So first, let me say, I am here as an artist. So I will be giving you what's called an ekphrastic view of Toni Morrison's work. So I read the book, the work here is based on the book, Song of Solomon. But to start off, I was introduced to Toni Morrison's work as a teenager. The first book that I read was The Bluest Eye, which I think is most people's introduction to Toni Morrison. And I was about 15 when I read that book. So most of the themes, most of the ideas went completely over my head. I wasn't a deep reader at that time. You know, I'm reading strictly to pass the quiz at the end of the novel. So last year, I tasked myself with revisiting Toni Morrison as an adult Black woman. And I was able to get through 5 novels last year. So I read Paradise, I read Jazz, I read Sula, I read Tar Baby, and the last one that I just finished is Song of Solomon. While reading those works, I was also working on a series of artwork that I have dubbed the Blue Sheet series. It is a series of 50 works, and these 4 in particular were definitely intentionally inspired by Toni Morrison's work. Of course, the other works in that series also are infused with a lot of Morrison influence, but these 4 particular pieces were very intentional. So again, I decided to revisit her novels as a grown Black woman because I figured it would feel different. Paradise gave me something different, Jazz gave me something different, and I read them in that order, specifically to revisit the ones that were less known. Because, you know, you hear a lot of people talk about The Bluest Eye, you hear everybody talking about Beloved, and the themes that they kind of tackle. But to start with Paradise was definitely a ride, right, to say the least. And then to move on to Jazz and realize that I didn't like that. I didn't like Jazz. And then I had to really deal with myself about not liking a Toni Morrison novel. That was a whole, like, who am I to not like a Toni Morrison? Like, what? You sound crazy. Yeah, like, what do you mean? And then, you know, to visit Tar Baby and that, to reread that novel in particular, there was this thing that kind of clicked for me that Toni Morrison does in her work, her relationship with flora, what she does with nature, what she does with water, that is prevalent in almost all of her works. And then to reread Sula and to see so much of myself in those characters, like each of them individually. Was also at this big age I'm at now, which is why I wear hats so you can't see my gray hair. But at this big age now, it was completely different. It was a whole different experience. And I challenge you, if you haven't touched some Morrison novels in some years, I challenge you to revisit them. Like it's a whole different type of experience. So with this work here, and I'll read some of the excerpts that are most definitely that inform the 4 that I've brought with me today. But this work, I think, is very important. Well, let me go back. When you think about ekphrastic artwork, it usually goes the other way around. It's usually an artwork that informs literature or poetry. But in this case, the literature completely informed the work. And again, with these 4 works, very intentionally. So on this first one, the book Song of Solomon begins, and this is the first excerpt I'll read, but the book begins with, and she introduces you immediately to the idea of flying, right? So I'll read that one first. Don't laugh at me. The North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance agent promised to fly from Mercy to the other side of Lake Superior at 3 o'clock. 2 days before the event was to take place, he tacked a note to the door of his little yellow house. At 3 o'clock p.m. on Wednesday, the 18th of February, which is also Toni Morrison's birthday, and Amita Robinson, and Audre Lorde, 1931, I will take off from Mercy and fly away on my own wings. Please forgive me. I loved you all. Signed, Robert Smith, insurance agent. So that intro, with this first piece, I captured, and not literally, because I took my artistic liberties to interpret that in the way that I saw fit. So that's what you see in this first ekphrastic piece. And by the way, these don't have titles. Again, they were part of my series of 50 blue sheets, so they are numbered. So I don't know what number that is specifically, but I did all of these kind of towards the end of that series as I was reading this book. So they're not set up in any specific order. I didn't hang them in any specific order, because each time I hang them, I would imagine it will tell a different story. So that is what inspired that one. So then in the next one, it is my liberty of who Milkman Dead is. His journey in this book was really interesting to me in that he felt like he didn't have a future because he didn't know his past. So I think it spoke to me in a way like it's okay to not know, but it's also okay to find out. Let me go to that passage. There's two of them, actually. Let's read this one. Milkman stood before his mirror and glanced in the low light of the wall lamp at his reflection. He was, as usual, unimpressed with what he saw. He had a fine enough face, eyes women complimented him on, a firm jawline, splendid teeth. Taken apart, it looked all right, even better than all right, but it lacked coherence, a coming together of features into a total self. It was all very tentative, the way he looked, like a man peeping around a corner of some place he's not supposed to be, trying to make up his mind whether to go forward or turn back. The decision he made would be extremely important, but the way in which he made the decision would be careless, haphazard, and uninformed. So that is loosely what you see, or what I felt initially who Milkman was in that second piece there. So then the book goes on, of course, and Milkman had an aunt named Pilot, right? To me, at first read, without being too far into the book yet, and Song of Solomon is one of the Morrisons that I wasn't very familiar with at all. Like I hadn't really touched it. Maybe, a summary, so to speak, but not really read it for myself. And I think that's also something that a lot of people do with Morrison's work is some of it is word of mouth. Like, people don't actually sit down and take the time to read it for themselves. So you get a bunch of people that use the quotes and, but they haven't really read the work, right? So, again, meeting Pilot for the first time, I'll say, honestly, she felt like the crazy aunt. You know what I'm saying? Like, everybody got one. I might be her, right? I might be her. I'm pretty sure I am. But anyway, I digress. And so in Pilot, I realized that maybe I don't know what freedom looks like. And there were a handful of other characters reading these through the 5 that I got through that made me kind of focus on that too. Like, what is freedom? What does it look like individually, right? Because if you don't know it individually, how do we get there collectively? So Pilot, for me, began to represent that. Like, she didn't care what nobody thought. She was going to do her, right? But she was also there for her loved ones, like when Milkman and Guitar went to jail. She showed up. She showed her ass a little bit, because that ain't who she was. But she came. She showed up. So the third piece there is my representation of Pilot. She is the crazy aunt, very much free, very much herself more than anything. So this next, did I find that one? I don't know if I found a passage for her. Because again, I wasn't reading the novels, her work, to make it, to annotate them or do anything academic. It was really a personal journey. It was very, very much for me. So I don't know if I don't think I pointed out how I got to pilot except for she's the crazy aunt. But I love how her character develops, but also you'll see in that piece, oh, I did. Wait a minute. I did. Here we go. So in this piece here, the pilot, the crazy aunt again, you know, in one earring, she had her name folded up, and it was in a box. She hung it from her ear. And I love how Toni Morrison went through the process of keeping the history of how Black people earn their names, right? So when Milkman's dad decided that he didn't want Pilot to come to the house anymore, there was a reason. And she goes, you know, it is in the novel, read it. But this is what I'll say in regard to that. So, and I think in a way, Milkman's dad, Macon Sr., was threatened by Pilot, her freedom. So this is in regard to that. And as if that were not enough, a sister named Pilot dead, who would never mention to her brother the circumstances or the details of this foolish misnaming of his son, because the whole thing would have delighted her. She would savor it, maybe fold it too in a brass box and hang it from her other ear. So that is what you see in the third piece there. So also with this Song of Solomon and her other novels as well, Toni Morrison does a great job at putting history in a situation, making it situational, right? So, you know, we all, again, a lot of things are word of mouth, you know, and the story changes from person to person. So in this Song of Solomon, to frame it, the men are sitting in this barbershop, and over the radio comes in a report of when Emmett Till was killed, right? And I don't know about anybody else, but for me, I had never put that in a situation before. Like, it's always just been something I have read in a book, right? Or have watched the documentary on TV. But this made it real. Like, it gave it a whole different vibe. So in this last piece is my representation of, or interpretation, let's say, rather, of how reading that in this book made me feel. How that must have been how the sorrow must have floated through the air in regard to that situation. And I don't think I had ever situated myself in that experience before, in that way. So this next little bit I'll read is when they were in the barbershop and that news came over the radio. If I can find it, I just had it in my hand. And this is also, this can also relate to how I interpreted how Milkman must have looked. And again, it's not literal. Milkman secretly preferred FDR and felt very close to him. Closer, in fact, to him. This is not the right one. Wait a minute. Hold, please. Here we go. Sorry. Shh, said Railroad Tommy. Guitar turned around and motioned him to come in, but be quiet. They were listening to the radio and muttering and shaking their heads. It was some time before Milkman discovered what they were so tense about. A young Negro boy had been found stomped to death in Sunflower County, Mississippi. There were no questions about who stomped him. His murderers had boasted freely, and there were no questions about the motive. The boy had whistled at some white woman, refused to deny he had slept with others, and was a Northerner visiting the South. His name was Till. So this whole section and how guitar reacts in contrast to how Milkman reacts to it, who is very much lacks identity in some sense. But again, it situated those things for me. And I think that's why ekphrastic art is so important. It gave me a way to process the work. It gave me a way to document the work. It gave me the opportunity with honor to honor Toni Morrison's work. And I am very thankful and grateful for that. And it also, I think, thinking about it now, with these 50 sheets, it gave me a language. It gave me an opportunity to find a voice, to explore, to find freedom. And I'm very, 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 very grateful for that. So, today we celebrate Toni Morrison. I appreciate her. And again, I challenge you all to visit her work, revisit her work again, interrogate yourself on how these themes make you feel, which is the real reason I challenge myself to do this. Because I don't think, I'm sure, I hadn't really thought about the things, the themes, the ideas in these novels the way that I was challenged to look at them now at a big age. Thank you.
Thank you again, Tiffany Lawson. And for those joining in person, if you want to take a closer look at the art, you're welcome to do so. Again, we'll take about a 5-minute break, and we will be back with Tyiesha Radford Shorts. All right, everybody, we are going to get started with our next speaker this afternoon. So if anyone joined us last year or watched online, the stage will look familiar. Our next speaker is Tyiesha Radford Shorts, who is a writer and independent researcher with a passion for community education. She serves as the director of the Giovanni Collective, a writing organization for Black women in Central Ohio. Tyiesha lives in Columbus's Bronzeville neighborhood with her husband Marshall, and she will be joined by Donna Marbury. So last year, Donna was the featured speaker, and Tyiesha was the interviewer, and their roles are swapped this year. So please join me in welcoming Donna Marbury and Tyiesha Radford Shorts.
Okay, can y'all hear me? Yes. So I get nervous around tech, so if I mess up, just ignore it.
Our once-a-year podcast.
This is our once-a-year podcast, our annual podcast that we have informally, unofficially started.
Right.
Again, I'm Tyiesha Radford Shorts, Columbus girl, born and raised. I'm here with Donna Marbury, the beautiful, the intelligent. Her writing is textured in such a way that I really just adore her mind and thought we should come back and have this conversation with one another again. So last year, she was the invitee. And she asked me to join her. And then while we were here, I complained so much about not being invited that Zach took pity on me and invited me this year. And so thank you to Zach and to Bexley Public Library. And yeah, we're gonna do what we usually do, which is kind of chit chat as Black girls.
But beloved.
About this wild ride, beloved. And so I'm going to kind of open this up, and then we'll have some dialogue. And I've invited folks who are in the audience to kind of jump in because it's real informal. We're both educators and community. We have public-facing things. We believe in the collective knowledge, collective understanding. And so we hope that you join us in conversation today. I had almost forgotten the story of Margaret Garner when I first read Toni Morrison's Beloved. Had almost forgotten the woman, measured and fair-skinned, whose features resembled her own mother's abuser. Couldn't name all the families who gathered everyone their arms could carry, from the rich brown soil of Kentucky's Dixie Highway to the uncertain waters of the Ohio River, just years before that same river erupted in battle on either side. Details surrounding the day-long shootout between Archibald Gaines, federal marshals, and Robert Garner, Margaret Garner's husband, were almost lost to me. Yet as Black people in this nation, especially those of us living in Ohio, we have heard Margaret's story many, many times before, or at least something like it. Each retelling conjures new details. Instead of Kentucky, a family would escape from Virginia or Tennessee or Alabama. Instead of a stop in Cincinnati, souls would cross safely to Canada. But the journey to and through Ohio proved universal in its intentionality. There was a shared understanding that Ohio could afford a kind of freedom from the vestiges of oppression, even if that freedom could only be confined to the physical world. Beloved insists that we remember Margaret's story, insists that we remember freedom is not limited to one's ability to control one's own movement. Freedom also lies in the collective ability to tell and retell our own stories. Beloved invites us to hear the song we learned in childhood and, despite having forgotten the lyrics, hum along to its unmistakable tune. For Morrison, that song came in the form of a newspaper article originally published in 1856. Morrison included this article in her early work, The Black Book, and carried the short story it inspired with her, and shared the short story it inspired with her writing circle that eventually became the Nobel Prize-winning novel that we know today. And I'll read a bit of the article. I'm actually going to read the article in its entirety because it's important. From the American Baptist, a visit to the slave mother who killed her child. Last Sabbath, after preaching in the city prison, Cincinnati, through the kindness of the deputy sheriff, I was permitted to visit the apartment of that unfortunate woman, concerning whom there has been so much excitement during the last 2 weeks. I found her with an infant in her arms, only a few months old, and observed that it had a large bunch on the forehead. I inquired the cause of the injury. She then proceeded to give a detailed account of her attempt to kill her children. She said that when the officers and slave hunters came to the house in which they were concealed, she caught a shovel and struck 2 of her children on the head, and then took a knife and cut the throat of the third and tried to kill the other. That if they had given her time, she would have killed them all. That with regard to herself, she cared but little, but she was unwilling to have her children suffer as she had done. I inquired if she was not excited, almost to madness, when she committed the act. No, she replied. I was as cool as I am now, and would much rather kill them at once, and thus end their sufferings, than have them taken back to slavery and be murdered by piecemeal. She then told the story of her wrongs. She spoke of her days of suffering, of her nights of unmitigated toil, while the bitter tears coursed their way down her cheeks and fell in the face of the innocent child as it looked smiling up, little conscious of the danger and probable suffering that awaited it. As I listened to the facts and witnessed the agony depicted in her countenance, I could not but exclaim, "Oh, how terrible is irresponsible power when exercised over intelligent beings." She alludes to the child that she killed as being free from all trouble and sorrow, with a degree of satisfaction that almost chills the blood in one's veins. Yet she evidently possesses all the passionate tenderness of a mother's love. She is about 25 years of age and apparently possesses an average amount of kindness, with a vigorous intellect and much energy of character. The two men and the two other children were in another apartment, but her mother-in-law was in the same room. She says she is the mother of 8 children, most of whom have been separated from her. That her husband was once separated from her 25 years, during which time she did not see him. That could she have prevented it, she would never have permitted him to return, as she did not wish him to witness her sufferings or be exposed to the brutal treatment that he would receive. She states that she has been a faithful servant, and in her old age, she would not have attempted to obtain her liberty. But as she became feeble and less capable of performing labor, her master became more and more exacting and brutal in his treatment, until she could stand it no longer. That the effort could result only in death at most. She therefore made the attempt. She witnessed the killing of the child, but said she neither encouraged nor discouraged her daughter-in-law, for under similar circumstances, she would probably have done the same. The old woman is from 60 to 70 years of age, has been a professor of religion about 20 years, and speaks with much feeling of the time when she shall be delivered from the power of the oppressor and dwell with the Savior, where the wicked cease from troubling and the weary are at rest. These slaves, as far as I am informed, have resided all their lives within 16 miles of Cincinnati. We are frequently told that Kentucky slavery is very innocent. If these are its fruits, where it exists in a mild form, will someone tell us what we may expect from its more objectionable features? But comments are unnecessary. P.S. Bassett, Fairmont Theological Seminary, Cincinnati, Ohio, February 12th, 1856. And so that's the article that Toni Morrison read that introduced her to the story of Margaret Garner, and ultimately led to the work. The newsprint, reprinted far and wide, subsumes Margaret Garner's decision into an anti-slavery cause, arguing Garner should be tried for murder as a free woman and not theft as a bondwoman. Morrison saves us from having to decide Garner's guilt or innocence, and argues none of us are equipped to make that decision anyway, by turning the gaze to the true culprit, the institution of slavery. So I want us to kind of, you already getting started, and I already, okay, so I want us to kind of think through Morrison's kind of introduction to this article, but more importantly, I want us to kind of think through how the story is presented or represented, right? So in Beloved, the title character is not Margaret. The title character is Setha, but she's also called Setha Garner, which I think is important. And she is also a fugitive from Kentucky in the same way that Margaret is, and they're kind of like fictive kin in a way. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on why it's important not to retell the story exactly, right, but to kind of represent it in a different way.
Yeah, and I think, reading this book, rereading it from when I was in college, which was decades ago, to today,
the 1900s.
I interrogated every word from the beginning to the end. And in this foreword, I think it's really interesting where this story came about for Toni Morrison. Obviously inspired by that article that you just read, but she was in a place of unemployment. She had time to kind of think and dream. And so, as you know, and as I know as a journalist, journalism is factual. Like, we have facts of what happened, but what Toni Morrison is really doing in this book is beyond journalism, which is adding that humanity. And as humane as that article is, which I feel like it's pretty humane, it is not giving the depth of experience that Toni Morrison is giving in this book. So I think it's really important how empathetic she was in writing this story when you write something from a factual point of view, there are too many facts that cannot be filled in. I think she's using intuition and imagination as her facts to kind of put this story together in a way that she could only do it. And it's that element of magic or that haunting, that spirit, that is also not a pinpoint. Like, I couldn't write an article and say, oh, there's a ghost living in my house. Like,
Right.
You know, my editor would be like, what, girl? But based off of her experience as a Black woman in Ohio, based off of her research as a Black person into the institution of slavery, there are certain things she just knew occurred. And that is the beauty of her literary intuition, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's an intuition that rejects this idea that what happened to Margaret Garner, and then in this case, Setha, was a singular event, right? And so a lot of the coverage that happened on the incident really tried to turn Margaret into this singular kind of character, this one bestial, in some instances, person who would do this horrible crime, who would commit this horrible crime, and there needs to be more regulations around her reproductive choice, around her autonomy, et cetera. And I think Morrison is kind of interjecting and saying, no, she's not the only one that's made this decision. There are several women who are in similar conditions who also had to make this decision, and how can I present it in a way that shows her not as this individual kind of person, character, but someone who is a part of a community of people who have had to make this very difficult decision. You said that you couldn't write about a ghost in someone's house, and I'm curious to know if, let's say you were presented with that, right? Somebody was like, listen, this ghost is in here hiding stuff from me. I can only get one sock out the dryer every other wash load. And they're suggesting it to you in a way that shows that they're being sincere. How would you frame that? Or what lessons would you take from Morrison about how to humanize that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things that we talked about in the study of this book is Beloved Even Real? And I had questions throughout reading this book of whether this ghost / woman that came to life is an actual real person or some kind of, what I looked up, a collective hallucination. And so that would be interesting to me, to kind of go down that stream of thought. There's definitely, and Morrison does an amazing job of exploring this history of the Haints and this Black tradition. I have this other book, I'm going to give you a copy of this book, that I just happen to have on my bookshelf, and it kind of fell off the bookshelf to me, called Toni Morrison's Spiritual Vision. And it talks about like this tradition of spirit babies and like where this idea of ghosts in the Black tradition come from. And I think, you know, it's really interesting to me. Now, what I personally write, I don't have the background in ghost journalism, so I'll probably have to pass that on to a colleague. However, I am really interested in the how the spirit manifests, and is it an actual real thing or a trauma response? Yeah.
Okay. So our love language individually and then kind of between one another is getting each other books. So there are constant promises of books. I think Donna does a better job of it than I do, but I'm glad to know that I have another book coming. So.
And another thing I want to mention about the origins of the story and her choices to tell the story the way she did is though her killing the baby is kind of the crux of the story, it is not the most horrific thing that happens in this book.
No.
There's lots of horrible things that happen. And so it is curious and a choice, I think, by Toni Morrison, that type of the black on black crime gets the fanfare, where all of these other crimes committed against black people do not.
Yeah, so we weren't gonna, we went back and forth about whether or not we were gonna bring the libretto in here. So in addition to the book, Toni Morrison wrote the libretto for the opera Margaret Garner. And there is a refrain throughout the libretto where Margaret and her husband at the time are kind of carted off as being criminals, but Edward Gaines, who is the slave master in the opera, there's a refrain of like, he hasn't committed a crime, right? And they keep referencing all of these horrible, deplorable things that he's done to a young person who is kind of unnamed, but we know it's a crime of passion against the body, but there's this refrain of, he hasn't broken the law. He hasn't committed a crime. And so this distinction, right, and this almost overemphasis on what Margaret or Sethe has done as being this crime, right, when it's really a response to, and in some ways, a proactive kind of resistance towards all of these other kinds of crimes that they experience. As we were preparing for this, I fell down so many rabbit holes. I have to apologize to my husband because I know his algorithm is messed up on his YouTube page because I just kept, this next one, I'm gonna just read this next one or listen to this next one. But there's an interview that Morrison does, to your point about the crimes and how vicious they are. She talks about her choice to portray Beloved as a ghost. And she says, I was in competition with slavery. The imagination of the slaveholders and the sensational aberrations that slaveholders came up with, a kind of really creative cruelty. It was simply too much to absorb. And so I had to keep cleaning it up and pushing it back, making my story much less sensational than the real story of what slavery was, right? And so there are ways that violence creeps in to Beloved, and sometimes you read it and you don't even realize that that's what you've read. I know if you're anything like me, I have to read and reread passages of Beloved repeatedly, but there are constantly these reminders of how insidious violence is, to the point where you don't almost recognize that it even happened. And I want to take this opportunity to read a passage from the text. Denver is Sethe's living daughter. She's a very curious child when it comes to her own origin stories, right? She wants to hear about how she was made and born all the time. She doesn't give too much emphasis to the rest of her family's background, but there is a point in Beloved where she asks Sethe about her own childhood. Why they hang your ma'am? Denver asked. This was the first time she had heard anything about her mother's mother. Baby Suggs was the only grandmother she knew. I never found out. It was a lot of them, she said. But what was getting clearer and clearer as she folded and refolded damp laundry was the woman called Nan, who took her hand and yanked her away from the pile before she could make out the mark. Nan was the one who knew best, who was around all day, who nursed babies, cooked, had one good arm and half of another, and who used different words Sethe understood then, but could neither recall nor repeat now. She believed that must be why she remembered so little before Sweet Home, except singing and dancing and how crowded it was. What Nan told her, she had forgotten, along with the language she told it in, the same language her ma'am spoke and which would never come back, but the message that was and had been there all along. Holding the damp white sheets against her chest, she was picking meaning out of her code she no longer understood. Nighttime. Nan holding her with her good arm, waving the stump of the other in the air. Telling you, I am telling you, small girl Setha. And she did that. She told Setha that her mother and Nan were together from the sea. Both were taken up many times by the crew. She threw them all away but you. The one from the crew she threw away on the island. The others from more whites she also threw away. Without names, she threw them. You, she gave the name of the black man. She put her arms around him. The others, she did not put her arms around. Never, never. Telling you, I am telling you, small girl Setha. And so it's beautiful language. It's Morrison, so it's always beautiful language, right? But in here we see mutilation. In here we see crimes of sexual violence. In here we see a taking away of language. We see separation of family, right? All of this in that one passage, and it just seems like it flows seamlessly. And these are not crimes that Black folks are doing to one another, right? These are crimes that are inflicted upon them that usually go unnoticed. I feel like you were going to say something.
Yeah, and the response to that, all of those series of crimes is a emotional detachment from a mother to her child, because it's unfathomable. And that is, echoed several times in the book, from that passage you just read to Baby Suggs and to Setha. There's an emotional detachment that a mother has from her own kids, because the outcome of these children is unfathomable.
Yeah.
And I think that is the response, the emotional and the psychological damage that she excellently explores.
And it goes back to that communal or shared hallucination, trauma response, right? This idea that this thing is happening continuously to me, and then I'm also witnessing it happen continuously to those around me. And I never know when this thing is going to happen to me, whether on this plantation or somewhere else. I want to shift gears a little bit to Paul D. And what we learn of as violence against Black men during this time. And I think, Paul D is often called the last of the Sweet Home Men, which has its own implications just about how enslaved men were considered, whether they were considered men or not, and then actually the fact that he's the last surviving male, right? And all of the things that he witnesses. And there's a passage from when he's in Alfred, Georgia. So he gets away from the plantation, which is toward the end what he kind of wanted, and then realizes that there are these brand new hells that are awaiting him kind of outside of the plantation. I'll let you, if you want to say something to that, and I'll try to find this passage.
He ends up on a chain gang, which is emotionally traumatizing, physically traumatizing, collectively traumatizing, and he endures not only the fear of waking up didn't they wake up to gunshots every morning?
And High Man.
Yes, which is, terrifying. And one thing, we didn't talk about this, but I'm gonna just bring it up because I thought about it, is the song choices that they had on the chain gang, which were, and this isn't thought out, I'm on the fly.
I love it.
I'm thinking about the coded language of these chain gang songs, and how they were really killing the white man in these songs. But they had to code it, they had to pad it, and that was really their way of kind of coping with this extremely traumatic experience they were going through. And there's a part where Paul D is in 124, and he's humming in the house, and he's like, I can't hum those chain gang songs in here. Because they're a lot.
They're not appropriate
They're
for
not
a house full of
appropriate.
women.
Right.
Yeah.
But in that period of time, they were using that music and that language to exercise the pain that they were experiencing.
Exercise the pain, and also I think live out. Fantasy is probably not the best word, but it's the one that I can use for right now. And I'm thinking of I saw a brief documentary about a chain gang. It was about the music of chain gangs, and one of their songs was "My Favorite Peaches Don't Grow on Trees," right? So it's this idea of not just a violent response, but also a lustful response, right? If you have a particular orientation and you're not able to kind of exercise freedoms in that way, that's going to manifest as a song, right? And that's going to help you keep tempo, right? And help you burn off some of this energy, right? But wouldn't be appropriate in a house full of young women. And so there is, I don't know if I want to read this full passage because I do want to give you time to get to kind of the meat of the thing that we want to talk about today. But I think I'll kind of open it up with when Paul D is kind of on the chain gang and he's kind of realizing like, okay, this is where I am. This is what it's going to be. Still no one else knew because it began inside. A flutter of a kind in the chest, then the shoulder blades. It felt like rippling, gentle at first and then wild, as though the further south they led him, the more his blood, frozen like an ice pond for 20 years, began thawing, breaking into pieces that once melted had no choice but to swirl and eddy. Sometimes it was in his leg. Then again, it moved to the base of his spine. By the time they unhitched him from the wagon and he saw nothing but dogs and 2 shacks in a world of sizzling grass, the roiling blood was shaking him to and fro, but no one could tell. The wrists he held out for the bracelets that evening were steady, as were the legs he stood on, and when chains were attached to the leg irons, but when they shoved him into the box, and dropped the cage door down, his hands quit taking instruction. On their own, they traveled. Nothing could stop them or get their attention. They would not hold him, they would not hold his member to urinate or a spoon to scoop lumps of lima beans into his mouth. The miracle of their obedience came with the hammer at dawn. All 46 men woke to rifle shot. All 46. No, hang on. So I'll skip this part and I'll go to the end, which is what I wanted to do. Chain up completed, they knelt down. Not one spoke to the other, at least not with words. The eyes had to tell what there was to tell. Help me this morning. It's bad. I'ma make it. New man, steady now, steady. So this idea that there had to be, in face of these new kinds of violences, this self-regulation, this self-censorship, this new way of relating to your body, a very physical way of relating to your body and training your body against itself, right? Against these natural inclinations in order to survive in a system that wasn't designed for you to survive, simply was designed to exploit your labor. So it doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter what you feel, it doesn't matter how you relate one to another. It is how much labor can be extracted from you.
Yeah, and there's a camaraderie that the enslaved people had on the plantation.
Yeah.
There was like a kind of unspoken or spoken camaraderie. But on the chain gang, it's like a physical camaraderie, like we have to all be together, lock and step.
Lock and step. And what happens to you or what you do impacts the rest of us.
The other 45.
Because we're connected, right? We're connected and we're interconnected. And so that community forms, It reforms, right? Because there are men who are very violently killed on the chain gang for complying or not complying or any reason at all. But then there is this new community that's kind of formed near Bluestone Road. And I want us to kind of talk about that. In real life, Margaret Garner and her husband and children escaped from Kentucky along with other people, right? So it's not just their family, they're a group of people. And it is thought that the other folks made it safely to Canada, right? We don't often talk about that. We don't often hear about that when we talk about this story. And I think that Morrison does a good job, while we are not talking about other families that escaped and made it to freedom, of painting this real story about freedom as it existed in Setha's world. And so we want to get to the colored women of Bluestone Road, and this level of hypervigilance that people experience in what is supposed to be free soil but isn't really free soil, right? With the Fugitive Slave Act that is saying you are still a slave regardless of where you are, and people are duty bound to come return you, right, to this state of enslavement. But then we also see what Morrison calls kind of this haughtiness, right? This Baby Suggs is getting a little too full of herself, right? Who she thinks she is. She feeding the whole neighborhood, she feeding the whole community. That's not her place, that's not her job. And so people kind of mistreat them until there's kind of a need to come together. And so I'm hoping you can talk about that.
I mean, one thing that really struck me about this book is the idea of community, but also the internal division that coexists at the same time.
Speak on it.
And so it's levels, it's layers of acceptance. But it's, I thought it was really interesting that if there was a drifter or a stranger or a ghost woman that comes in town, she had a house, like everybody had a place to stay.
Food,
got a job.
Taken care of.
Walking through. However, I think the point you're talking about of Baby Suggs being, she was different. She was a freed woman. She was a spiritual leader, and she had this idea of feeding the community, and some people didn't like that. Why? I think we see that play out many ways. There was this internal division that kind of really came to a head after the incident of with Setha and her child being killed, that they really kind of ostracized that whole family. It's unclear of who tipped the authorities off that there were fugitive slaves at Baby Suggs' house. Like, that's very unclear. Like, are we assuming that was a person in the community?
So a part of me does, but that's only because I'm like conspiracy theorists, like, who running their mouth? But I think there's a very real example of this with Stamp Paid. Right? And this idea that Paul D has come many, 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 many years after this incident, is hoping to make a life with Setha, is talking about having his own baby with Setha, and Stamp Paid is the one who gives him the news article to tell him, like, hey, yo, this is who you actually living with. All up in the business.
Right.
So that would be, if I had to guess, right? I think the larger point is, because it is unclear, that helps to foster this suspicion, right? So on top of the fact that you are suspicious of any white person who's coming through because they have the power and authority to kind of take you back, you also become suspicious of people who look like you, right? And what knowledge they have, and how are they going to barter that and trade that for their own survival at your expense. And so I'm imagining that Morrison kind of kept that a secret on purpose, right? So that the reader is also just as suspicious or curious as the people of the town.
But even in that,
They do.
So even when we get to the end of the book where the women kind of confront what's happening in 124 to help, before that help, there is a whole bunch of gossip, it's a whole bunch of judging, it's people who don't forgive Setha for what she did, there's all kind of hyperbole, but we don't know, we don't even know if this, I don't know if this is a real ghost or not. I don't know if she's having, to me it feels like she's having a psychotic event, but there is an actual person, but is there an actual person? It's very unclear. However, these women, I think it was 30 women, there were multiple women, but it came down to 30 who was like, all right,
what we gonna do?
That put stuff in their pocket. She didn't say what was in their pockets.
They brought the word of God.
They brought the word of God, but she also said they had things stuffed in their apron, so I'm assuming that was like the shank or something, I don't know. But they came to the property, and when they got there, they, the first vision they saw was a throwback of being at Baby Suggs, like cookout with catfish and being young girls. So this is where I'm like, okay, everybody's hallucinating. Everyone's having this kind of collective hallucination because they're not seeing what's there. They're immediately having a throwback vision. Collectively, they're all seeing it at the same time.
And it feels like time traveling almost for them. So they're going back to a place, even though it's not actually happening in real time, they're still going back to a place from when they were there and these things happened.
Yeah, and the confrontation at first is not a physical confrontation, it's a spiritual confrontation. They are decidedly not there. They didn't go straight up to the porch. They sat back for a minute, seeing this, having this kind of vision, and then they started praying and started to collectively kind of pray this thing. And so I think it's interesting that one quote I wrote down here is, "There's not a house in the country ain't packed to its rafter by some dead Negro's grief." So they all came to...
Still, to this day.
Yeah.
To this day.
They all came to this place of helping Setha because they understood, even though they may have not did what she did, they understood. And I think that was in the Black Book article you read, and that's also, throughout the book where people understood what she did. They understood why she did it. And even one lady in the book is like, okay, suffering with a ghost is one thing, but having a whole person, that's too much. Like, we gotta go exercise this thing out the house. And so I think it's really interesting kind of seeing how the community kind of ebbs and flows, it shapes, and the levels and the layers of acceptance throughout the community. And no matter where they lie, I think it was very interesting to me at the end of the day that the women came together to help solve this problem, even though they've been ostracizing this family for decades.
For decades.
At the same time.
Meanly.
Yeah.
Nice, nasty.
Nice, nasty, mean. The children, everybody in the community knew the story. She was able to work, she was able to make a living, but her family was emotionally, and then once again, it comes back to that emotional detachment, that allowed this community to survive.
Do you want to read the passage from when the colored women come to the property? And I call them the colored women because in Beloved is all one word, which I also think is a lovely way, a beautiful way that Morrison plays with language, right? There's a way that you have to pronounce it when it's all one word. But when they do eventually come to the property, they get active.
Yeah. So there's all this talk. They know that Beloved is in this house, like, wreck and shop. And so they're like, this is too much. We got to go figure this out and help Setha. And so it says, it was Ella, more than anyone, who convinced the others that rescue was in order. She was a practical woman who believed there was a fruit either to chew or avoid for all ailments. And I had to look this word up in the dictionary. Cogitation, as she called it, clouded things and prevented action. And I'm like, okay, we're using Toni Morrison and her language choices. I'm like, you know, put this $10 word up in here. What does this mean? The act of thinking too deeply. So if we think about this too much, we're not going to do it. We just need to go. It prevents action. Nobody loved her, and she wouldn't have liked it if they did. This is Ella. For she considered love a serious disability. Her puberty was spent in a house where she was shared by father and son, whom she called the lowest yet. It was the lowest yet who gave her a disgust for sex and against whomever she measured all atrocities. A killing, a kidnap, a rape, whatever. She listened and nodded. Nothing compared to the lowest yet. She understood Setha's rage in the shed 20 years ago, but not her reaction to it, which Ella thought was prideful, misdirected, and Setha herself too complicated. When she got out of jail and made no gesture toward anybody and lived as though she was alone, Ella jumped her and wouldn't give her the time of day. So I think this is interesting because Ella was the one that said, we need to go over there. Ella said, if we think about it too much, we're not going to do it. But then Ella also was like, I think Setha's too complicated. I understand why she did it. It wouldn't have been my choice because I've been through, and then there's this hierarchy of trauma. Like, I've been through something way traumatic and I didn't kill nobody.
Yeah.
So why are you killing people?
Yeah.
So she just had a distaste for that. Like, you're being too prideful and actually going to, so there's this hierarchy of like trauma response, I guess you would call it. But she's the ringleader. She's like, okay, I think that we should go over there. Let's see, where can we go? This whole like last chapter of the book, it's a lot going on.
Very action-packed.
So they end up going over there. La 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 la. So they get there, and the first thing she says is, "Shall we pray?" And they start to pray first, and then we got to get down to business. So they are praying in the field outside of the house. Let's see. What's happening next? So much is happening. The first thing they saw was not Denver sitting on the steps, but themselves. So this goes back to this idea of them having this collective flashback of being at Baby Suggs' house as younger women, maybe children, eating, having sort of like a cookout, horsey rides, all of this stuff. And Denver herself, who's sitting on the porch, doesn't even see them coming. So this is what I'm like, is this happening? Is this really happening? I don't know. What is happening? This is the journalist in me. Now I want facts. Like, now I want to know like, what is happening, what order, what's the timestamp, what's going on. So they're kneeling and praying, right? And then I've reread this a couple times. I don't know the action, like what happens first. All I know is Garner is coming to pick Denver up for work, correct?
Bodwin.
Bodwin is coming to pick Denver up for work. There's some kind of scuffle. He gets kind of stabbed.
Setha was going to take him up out of here.
Yeah.
She said, you're not taking my child.
And then Beloved kind of dissolves. Like she's kind of, and I'm looking for the exact word she uses. She fades, like she kind of fades back into the river. And so this is where I'm like, what? This feels like a collective, like psychotic event.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So I want us to think through whether or not we believe Beloved existed. I want us to close there. But before we get there, do we want to talk about the film since it's been looming above us?
3 minutes to this film.
So we went back and forth about whether or not we even wanted to talk about the film for lots of reasons.
You watched it, though.
I did watch it. I did watch it. I don't regret. I'm trying to think. I don't regret having watched it, but there were some choices that some actors made that didn't make the most sense to me, and so there was this effort to try to connect Beloved to being a child so that we knew she was the baby, but then she was a baby throughout the whole film, which was really weird for me.
And the film is important to talk about for 3 minutes because this is a lot of people's first interaction with Beloved and with Toni Morrison's work. And me and Tyiesha, we've talked about this a lot, of the choices. Like, why did Oprah choose to make a movie about this book? Like, not that it's not cinematic and gorgeous textured work, but why did Oprah decide that she was going to be make this film? And so in my little bit of research, I would say the thing I remember about this movie is my mom and my aunties going to see it and then being horrified, like, oh my God, that was terrible. And I'm like thinking, like, well, what were your expectations? But the landscape that Oprah set was, this was the time when this was like skinny Oprah, so she was like very svelte. She was on the cover of Vogue. I don't know if you remember that Vogue cover where she's kind of like laid out, very glamorous. And so in that photo shoot, these other actresses were also in it. It was very glamorous. And Oprah was telling people like, this movie's gonna change your life. It personally changed my life. And I'm just thinking, like, were you trying to, like, I think people's expectations were something different.
Yeah. So I should have started by saying the views and opinions expressed by Donna and myself are not reflective of Bexley Public Library, but absolutely, like, girl, what was you thinking? So to me, there's a range that someone has to have to be able to interact with or make the audience believe that they are interacting with the surreal, right? Yeah. With another entity, with another being. And I wasn't as convinced with the film, but there are so many things that kind of go into that we don't necessarily have to talk about today. But I do, if you're not going to read the book, which I encourage you to, you can watch the film and understand what happened, but it is not the novel.
And the story, Toni Morrison tells the story in a very, it's like memory based. It's cyclical, it's not a linear story. And each chapter unfolds more and more information about this time period that up into the point of Beloved being killed and then afterwards. And so that is the part of the storytelling in the book that is, I think, cinematically very hard to capture.
Yeah.
In 1990, whatever. Like, and this treatment probably deserves like a Netflix series from, it's
something
a totally
longer.
Different story mechanism that would capture the kind of psychotic thought processes of the characters in the book that does not exist in a linear kind of story. But I think, I don't want to say too much about Oprah because then I'll be working for her one day and you'd be like,
because I'm absolutely going to text you and be like, girl, remember when you had said. So before we close, is Beloved real? And you can interpret that question in whatever way you want to.
The trauma of the institution of slavery and how it haunts Black people is real.
Yeah.
That is very real. It can feel physically real. It is physically real.
Yeah.
it results in us having to do things to each other that we would not humanely do.
Yeah.
Something that happens 20 years ago, 6 months ago, a day ago, will cause you to react to another person in a certain way. Mm-hmm. So is the trauma of the institution of slavery real? Yes. Is the community haunted by that? Yes. Does it cause certain people in the community to have a stunted growth and act as if they are haunting the community? Yes.
Yeah.
I think all of those things are real. But I think she makes a choice to leave it kind of ambiguous. Like I told you, I almost want to reread it from that angle of like, is beloved real? Because I didn't really, had hints of it, but the last chapter really made me feel like maybe she's not even real.
Yeah. So I think I'm still undecided. I think to your point, Beloved is as real as the impact that she had. And so very much like when I found out the Willie Lynch letter wasn't technically real, right? But its teachings were real. People adopted that level of violence. And so Beloved is as real as her impact. What I appreciate that Morrison did at the end of this by calling into question whether or not Beloved was real is the same thing Black folk have been doing with folklore and lore since oral tradition kind of started, right? Which is we know something happened, right? What that something is going to be open to interpretation, right? It's going to have a new name, it's going to have a new nemesis, a new smell, a new taste, a new whatever, but it is going to be presented in a way that we know, that we can wrestle with, right? And that makes our experiences more livable.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are we taking questions or are we out of time?
That's up to Zach. We'll do 5 minutes. If you to direct them to Donna. I'm kidding. Yes, ma'am.
We've got a good audience online.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
I really believe that those women coming to the home to kick out whatever that is that was sucking the life out of Setha, I really believe that they did that as much or maybe more for Denver than Setha. Because before this, you know, as you said, Setha was withdrawn. She no longer interacted with the community, but the condition in the home got so terrible that Denver had to be brave enough as a girl, brave enough to start going out and interacting with the community. These women were leaving her food to take back home because her mother wasn't cooking no more. Beloved was eating everything. You know, they're leaving her food. That went on for a time. Then finally she had to get a job so that she could earn money to take care of her mother who was slowly fading away. I really do think that them coming may have been more for Denver, who is innocent in this, you know, but yet the haunting of slavery is bearing down upon her. It is crushing her, you know, and she never experienced it for herself. So I wanted to know what you all thought of that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I think that there's some hope that the community has in Denver as a person who was not enslaved, to not have to feel the wrath of what they have gone through. So I think that's an interesting perspective. And I love the idea that Denver is going on to go to college. Like, they want something else for her, even though they don't explicitly say it that way. But I think, yeah, they're feeding her in a way and taking care of her in a way that they clearly did not do for Setha. But maybe there's that hope of a child that was not enslaved to have a different kind of experience or life.
And before Setha killed Beloved, 124 was a space to save Black folk from slavery, right? It was a site of being saved. And so if anything, I think that memory kind of still lived in them in a tactile way, that there is a Black person coming through 124 that needs saving, and the people in 124 can't save her. And so it's our collective responsibility to come through and do the saving. And so we're gonna put rocks in our apron. We're gonna bring some blessed oil. We're gonna start with the prayer and then take it wherever Spirit leads. But we're gonna save Denver, and hopefully Setha too, but if Setha got to go, whatever, this thing got to get up out of here. So absolutely, thank you for that. In the back.
Your ask was it real? I think with slavery, people are determining whether or not it still hints of it. Even though we weren't there, there is still hints of a very real event, very traumatic things that happened. So to ask the question, was it real or not, I think you have to more so look at it from the perspective of what you're dealing with now and determine that answer, because literally still hints of,
Yeah, the vestiges live on.
it's not completely diminished, it hasn't went away, it's literally still there. It's still black on black crime, it's still black and white, it's still Martin Luther King's speech, all of it is literally still in the room. So.
Yeah. And then whose idea of real is it, right? Is it what white folks say is real, even though we're having these very real experiences that they're not acknowledging, right? How are we deciding, and who gets to decide what is real and what's not? You were going to say something.
And I like that idea that you're getting there, because even in this original article where the author says the innocence of Kentucky slavery, like that's still kind of diminishing the realness of what slavery was. Like,
Right.
I don't care how nice of a owner you were, like you still owned me and enslaved me, and that is violent.
Mm-hmm.
So that what is real is really interesting. And once I heal from this last reading of this book, I want to reread it, like I said, from that perspective of what is real and what's not.
Let's read it next year.
Next year.
Let's read it next year. She's going to be like, no. I'm going to ask her, and she's going to say no. So I think we're at time. Zach grabbed the microphone. He can ready shuffle us out of here. Thank you, Donna, and we appreciate you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tyiesha Radford Schwartz and Donna Marbury. We're going to take one more really quick break, and we will be back in about 5 minutes with Ajanaé Dawkins. All right, everybody, we're going to get started with our final presenter of the afternoon. Give everyone a second to get seated really quick. Wonderful. Thank you all again for coming out on this kind of blustery winter day that we've surprisingly found ourselves in. Thank you everybody online for joining as well. We have a wonderful crowd online. Our final presenter this afternoon is Ajanaé Dawkins, who is an interdisciplinary poet, performance artist, and theologian. Ajanaé is the winner of the Tinderbox Poetry Journal's Editor's Prize, a finalist for the Cave Canem Toy Derricotte and Cornelius Eady Chapbook Prize, and a finalist for the Brett Elizabeth Jenkins Poetry Prize. She was the Taft Museum's 2022 Duncanson Artist in Residence and is a fellow of Torch Literary Arts, The Watering Hole, and Pink Door. She is currently OSU's Urban Art Space Community Artist in Residence. You can find her in the middle of the dance floor, at the skate rink, the local winery, library, karaoke night, or in her kitchen cooking something new or something slow. Please join me in welcoming Ajanaé Dawkins.
Quiet as it's kept,
There were no marigolds in the fall of 1941. We thought at the time that it was because Pecola was having her father's baby that the marigolds did not grow. A little examination and much less melancholy would have proved to us that our seeds were not the only ones that did not sprout. Nobody's did. Not even the gardens fronting the lake showed marigolds that year, but so deeply concerned were we with the health and safe delivery of Pecola's baby, we could think of nothing but our own magic. If we planted the seeds and said the right words over them, they would blossom and everything would be all right. It was a long time before my sister and I admitted to ourselves that no green was going to spring from our seeds. Once we knew, our guilt was relieved only by fights and mutual accusations about who was to blame. For years, I thought my sister was right. It was my fault. I had planted them too far down in the earth. It never occurred to either of us that the earth itself might have been unyielding. We had dropped our seeds in our own little plot of black dirt, just as Pecola's father had dropped his seeds in his own plot of black dirt. Our innocence and faith were no more productive than his lust or despair. What is clear now is that all of the hope, fear, lust, love, and grief, nothing remains but Pecola and unyielding earth. Charlie Breedlove is dead. Our innocence too. The seeds shriveled and died, her baby too. There is really nothing more to say except why. But since why is difficult to handle, one must take refuge in how. Now that's how you open a book. I've said this to anyone who will let me ramble about the effect Toni Morrison has had on me. No character has ever haunted me like Pecola Breedlove. This is for a myriad of reasons, ranging from the fact that my black girlhood was stewarded by a predominantly white suburb that, with all of its effort, attempted to convince me that I was not an object of beauty or desire. It was the author Alexa Patrick, who wrote Remedies for Disappearing, that made me aware of how critical desire and ability to feel beautiful was to the experience of girlhood. How deeply intertwined beauty and desire are with so many coming of age rituals. First kisses, dances, proms. You have to be seen as beautiful. You have to be seen as desirable to participate in much of it. Growing up as a sensitive black girl prone to depressive episodes, boy crazy, and deemed fast-tailed, which is already its own leprous felony in a city where most of the boys found me ugly, did erode my sense of self. I actually came of age in the time where to distance yourself from blackness when complimented on your hair, skin, or eyes, people would immediately mention the Indian in their family, which is not to dismiss the complicated family trees of black folks in this country, but to say that I grew up in a time where if you were complimented on the beauty of your features, it was the non-black features against the black canvas that made you beautiful. So I'm gonna do a bit of interspersed reading of both Toni Morrison's work and my work in an effort to talk about why this book has affected me the way it has. This is a piece I wrote called Bait Fishing. I was 9 the first time I believed I was ugly. Skipstone teeth, gunpowder gums, electric wire laced in my shoes, 5 black braids lapping the nape of my neck. I was not white and not skinny. Cassidy was 72 pounds and half was her dark hair. First girl I hated for being what I was not. Loved by boys and faster than her field shadow. Something everyone could agree on. Again, I will come home hungry with empty hands. In front of the warped water mirror, my 2 baited pupils cast for beauty. I'm quiet as still rods and dust, but nothing is biting. No, I don't know how many boys I would chase while my blood-black shadow ran the opposite way, but I dream of boats brimming with fish, my eyes blinking in their mouths. It's fairly cliche, actually, and against my hopes for myself as a Black woman with a liberated love ethic. I did not want to be my ordinary Black self growing up. I wanted to be someone else, someone skinnier, someone more shapely, and so Toni Morrison gave me my first character who I'd read that was a deep reflection of what it meant to grow up believing you were ugly. The Breedloves did not live in a storefront because they were having temporary difficulty adjusting to the cutbacks at the plant. They lived there because they were poor and Black, and they stayed there because they believed they were ugly. Although their poverty was traditional and stultifying, it was not unique, but their ugliness was unique. No one could have convinced them that they were not relentlessly and aggressively ugly, except for the father, Charlie, whose ugliness, the result of despair, dissipation, and violence directed toward pretty things and weak people, was behavior. The rest of the family, Mrs. Breedlove, Sammy Breedlove, and Pecola Breedlove, wore their ugliness, put it on, so to speak, although it did not belong to them. The eyes, the small eyes set closely together under narrow foreheads, the low, irregular hairlines, which seemed even more irregular in contrast to the straight, heavy eyebrows which nearly met, keen but crooked noses with insolent nostrils. They had high cheekbones and their ears turned forward, shapely lips which called attention not to themselves but to the rest of the face. You looked at them and wondered why they were so ugly. You looked closely and could not find the source. Then you realized it came from conviction, their conviction. It was as though some mysterious, all-knowing master had given each one a cloak of ugliness to wear, and they had each accepted it without question. The master had said, "You are ugly people." They had looked about themselves and saw nothing to contradict the statement, saw, in fact, support for it, leaning at them from every billboard, every movie, every glance. Yes, they had said, "You are right," and they took the ugliness in their hands, threw it as a mantle over them, and went about the world with it, dealing with it each according to his way. Mrs. Breedlove handled hers as an actor does a prop, for the articulation of character, for support of a role she frequently imagined was hers, martyrdom. Sammy, used to his as a weapon to cause others pain, he adjusted his behavior to it, chose his companions on the basis of it, people who could be fascinated, even intimidated by it. And Pecola she hid behind hers, concealed, veiled, eclipsed, peeping out from behind the shroud very seldom, and then only to yearn for the return of her mask. About the creation of Pecola, Morrison said in an interview, "I wanted to take the name of Piola, the tragic mulatto character from the 1934 movie Imitation of Life, and play with it, turn it around," Morrison said. When she was young, she said, another little black girl and I were discussing whether there was a real God or not. I said there was, and she said there wasn't, and she had proof. She had prayed for and not been given blue eyes. I just remember listening to her and imagining her with blue eyes, and it was a grotesque thing. She had these high cheekbones and these great big slanted dark eyes, and all I remember thinking was that if she had blue eyes, she would be horrible. And so Pecola Breedlove has stayed against my rib. I say this not just because of the horror she endured, but always because of the ending of The Bluest Eye. I'm assuming if y'all here, y'all not stressed about spoiler alert, so. The ending of Bluest Eye, this image of Pecola looking into the mirror, talking to herself, descending into madness, and seeing blue eyes has haunted me since I first read this book in high school. What Morrison was saying with this ending is likely something about the way systemic, familial, and cultural violence alongside self-hatred can push anyone toward madness. A piece that I wrote about being haunted by Pecola a few years ago. Pecola Breedlove haunts my still waking. Blue black in the mirror, a ghost smiles back. You can hate yourself until madness presses like a knife against your eye. What is pain against the dream that spills out? One eye spinning toward God, one torn flesh silk. In the blur of blood, you rejoice. Finally, you are someone else. Much of Morrison's work gets characterized between the surreal and Gothic mystery, but I've been curious about Morrisonian madness and her engagement with metaphysics. What Pecola descends into can only be categorized as madness, which feels distinctly different from Morrison's spiritual and metaphysical engagement. In The Bluest Eye, Pecola's madness is in response to her deteriorating relationship with herself and her community. Pecola's madness further disconnects her from her society. Inversely, Morrison's engagement with spirituality or the metaphysical, whether through unsettled spirits, as our two sisters just came and spoke about, or invocations of flight, further connect a person to their community, lineage, or mythology. In this way, I feel shaped by Morrison as much as I feel haunted by some of the same social conditions that shaped her. I'm working on 2 projects right now, deeply shaped by both Morrison and some other literary ancestors who have left one of the wealthiest inheritances to me in their written works and in the work that they did in their time on this world. So one is a project that comes out in the spring. It's called Blood Flecks. It comes out with the New Delta Review. And it's a project that considers Black girlhood, coming of age, beauty, desire, and mother-daughter relationships, which feels very tied to The Bluest Eye. But my work in progress that I'm currently writing is about an aunt of mine who disappeared many years ago. My family discovered that she had been a victim of an unimaginable violence that led to her death. Prior to learning this, I began writing about her on Mars because, as churchy as I am, I could not write her as dead without the confirmation. If you know, you know. And then as I began writing about her, I found the reality of my aunt's circumstance, both before and after my family knew what happened to her. So both the reality that she had been missing for so many years and we didn't know what happened to her. And then once we did find out what happened to her, the incredible violence of that situation. I found both of those too difficult to sustainably write about, and so I began writing about her on Mars. It wasn't madness that led me to imagining my aunt on Mars, but as the image of her there became a place of solace in my creative work, I remembered Pecola, because it's not that I thought my aunt was actually on Mars as much as I thought it was possible that she was still alive somewhere before the detectives called with answers for my family. And then once confronted with the truth of her death, Mars felt like something I clung to as comfort more than representative of true possibility. And Pecola started coming back up again for me as I started thinking about what realities we feel able to accept. So in the case of Pecola, her being 11 years old, right, and pregnant with her father's child, versus what fantasies we choose to cling to. So I ended up writing again about Pecola, and this time I chose to put my aunt in conversation with Pecola Breedlove, because to sit and imagine something that isn't there until it becomes real enough to see felt like it was blurring these lines between Afrofuturism, spiritual practice, and Morrisonian madness. I had so much fun with my aunt on Mars that I had to start wrestling with Pecola again, wondering if the joy I had with her, with this fully lived life on this planet that we can't touch, where she has an alien lover and where Martians braid her hair, was my own refusal of engagement of the horror of reality more than it was a craft device. Was my world building a way to avoid writing that the kind of woman my aunt was, Black, a sex worker, an addict, is the kind the world hated in life and blamed in death? This I'm still answering, but Pecola continues to arrive. So here is a piece I wrote where I put them in conversation. Pecola Breedlove and my aunt speak on Mars. Pecola asks, they'll think my eyes are pretty way out there. My aunt says, I can't say. No one really has eyes out here. You know the shape and color of a person because you can taste the space between them and the moon. The flavor of that space tells you so much more than iris and hue. There's all kind of stuff they don't have out here. And Pecola asked, like what? And my aunt says, I tried to tell them most people consider me dead back home. And they said, what's dead? And I tried to tell them about the man I went to visit in his bout of violence, and they said, what is violence? And I tried to tell them my brother was looking for me, and they said, what's a brother? It's funny, mothers, they understand. sisters too, which is wilder because there is no gender, but they know what a mother tastes like. Bacola asked, they got anyone up there that can get messages to God? My aunt says, all of them. We so far out, God is practically our neighbor. I mean, heaven is right there. I go knocking on her door just to borrow eggs sometimes. They freeze right away. So I've been meditating on madness, on beauty and social violence. So at the end of The Bluest Eye, spoiler alert, at the end of The Bluest Eye, Bacola descends into madness, like I mentioned, believing that Soaphead, another violent fixture, through his connection to God, has given her blue eyes. And it is her final divorce from society. Her madness is deeply intertwined with the violence that she's experienced, so deeply intertwined with the violence that she's experienced that when people stare at her 11-year-old pregnant belly, knowing the child is her father's, she believes it's their jealousy of her blue eyes. Her madness so deeply separates her from society. It separates her from the violence in herself, cushioning her from the lie of the European beauty standards that pushed her to this place to begin with. I am going to close reading this section that was my undoing. As a young person, we'll start here. So this is the last bit of The Bluest Eye as Bacola is talking to herself. What will we talk about? Why your eyes? Oh, yes, my eyes, my blue eyes. Let me look again. See how pretty they are. Yes, they get prettier each time I look at them. They are the prettiest I've ever seen. Really? Oh, yes. Prettier than the sky? Oh, yes, much prettier than the sky. Prettier than Alice and Jerry's storybook eyes? Oh, yes, much prettier than Alice and Jerry's storybook eyes. And prettier than Joanna's? Oh, yes, and bluer too. Bluer than Michelina's? Yes. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. You don't sound sure. Well, I am sure, unless what? Oh, nothing. I was just thinking about a lady I saw yesterday. Her eyes were blue, but no, not bluer than yours. Are you sure? Yes, I remember them now. Yours are bluer. I'm glad. Me too. I'd hate to think that there was anybody around here than bluer eyes than yours. I'm sure there isn't. Not around here anywhere, anyway. But you don't know, do you? You haven't seen everybody, have you? No, I haven't. So there could be, couldn't there? Not hardly. And maybe you said around here, nobody around here probably has bluer eyes. What about someplace else? Even if my eyes are bluer than Joanna's and bluer than Michelina's and bluer than that lady's you saw, and suppose there is somebody way off somewhere with bluer eyes than mine. Don't be silly. There could be, couldn't there? Not hardly. But suppose a long way off in Cincinnati. Say there is somebody whose eyes are bluer than mine. Suppose there are two people with bluer eyes. So what? You asked for blue eyes, you got blue eyes. He should have made them bluer. Who? Mr. Soaphead. Did you say what color blue you wanted them? No, I forgot. Oh, well, look over there at that girl. Look at her eyes. Are they bluer than mine? No, I don't think so. Did you look real good? Yes. Here comes someone. Look at this. See if they're bluer. You're being silly. I'm not going to look at everybody's eyes. You don't have to. No, I don't. Please, if there is somebody with bluer eyes than mine, then maybe there is somebody with the bluest eyes. The bluest eyes in the whole world. That's just too bad, isn't it? Please help me look. No, but suppose my eyes aren't blue enough. Blue enough for what? Blue enough for, I don't know. Blue enough for something. Blue enough for you. I'm not going to play with you anymore. Oh, don't leave me. Yes, I am. Why? Are you mad at me? Yes. Because my eyes aren't blue enough? Because I don't have the bluest eyes? No, because you're acting silly. Don't go. Don't leave me. Will you come back if I get them? Get what? The bluest eyes. Will you come back then? Of course I will. I'm just going away for a little while. You promise? Sure, I'll be back right before your very eyes. So it was, a little black girl yearns for the blue eyes of a little white girl, and the horror at the heart of her yearning is exceeded only by the evil of fulfillment. We saw her sometimes, Frida and I, after the baby came too soon and died, after the gossip and the slow wagging of heads. She was so sad to see. Grown people looked away. Children, those who were not frightened by her, laughed outright. The damage done was total. She spent her days, her tendril, sap-green days, walking up and down, her head jerking to the beat of a drummer so distant only she could hear. Elbows bent, hands on shoulders, she flailed her arms like a bird in an eternal, grotesquely futile effort to fly, beating the air, a winged but grounded bird intent on the blue void it could not reach, could not even see, but which filled the valleys of the mind. We tried to see her without looking at her and never went near, not because she was absurd or repulsive, but because we were frightened, but because we had failed her. Our flowers never grew. I was convinced that Frida was right, that I had planted them too deeply. How could I have been so sloven? We avoided Pecola breed love forever, and the years folded up like pocket handkerchiefs. Sammy left town long ago. Charlie died in the workhouse. Mrs. Breedlove still does housework, and Pecola is somewhere in that little brown house she and her mother moved to on the edge of town, where you can see her even now once in a while. The bird-like gestures are worn away to a mere picking and plucking her way between the tire rims and the sunflowers, between Coke bottles and milkweed, among all the waste and beauty of the world, which, what she herself was, all of our waste, which we dumped on her and which she absorbed, and all of our beauty, which was hers first and which she gave to us, all of us, all who knew her, felt so wholesome after we cleaned ourselves on her. We were so beautiful when we stood astride her ugliness. Her simplicity decorated us. Her guilt sanctified us. Her pain made us glow with health. Her awkwardness made us think we had a sense of humor. Her inarticulateness made us believe we were eloquent. Her poverty kept us generous. Even her waking dreams we used to silence our own nightmares, and she let us, and thereby deserved our contempt. We honed our egos on her, padded our characters with her frailty, and yawned in the fantasy of our strength, and fantasy it was, for we were not strong, only aggressive. We were not free, merely licensed. We were not compassionate. We were polite, not good, but well behaved. We courted death in order to call ourselves brave, and hid like thieves from life. We substituted good grammar for intellect. We switched habits to simulate maturity. We rearranged lies and called it truth, seeing in the new pattern of an old idea the revelation and the word. She, however, stepped over into madness, a madness which protected her from us simply because it bored us in the end. Oh, some of us loved her. The Maginot Line and Charlie loved her. I'm sure he did. He, at any rate, was the one who loved her enough to touch her, envelope her, give something of himself to her, but his touch was fatal, and the something he gave her filled the matrix of her agony with death. Love is never any better than the lover. Wicked people love wickedly. Violent people love violently. Weak people love weakly. Stupid people love stupidly. But the love of a free man is never safe. There is no gift for the beloved. The lover alone possesses his gift of love. The loved one is shorn, neutralized, frozen in the glare of the lover's inward eye, and now when I see her searching the garbage, for what? The thing we assassinated? I talk about how I did not plant the seeds too deeply, how it was the fault of the earth, the land of our town. I even think now that the land of the entire country was hostile to marigolds that year. The soil is bad for certain kinds of flowers. Certain seeds it will not nurture, certain fruit it will not bear, and when the land kills of its own volition, we acquiesce and say the victim had no rights to live. We are wrong, of course, but it doesn't matter. It's too late. At least on the edge of my town, among the garbage and the sunflowers of my town, it's much, much, much too late. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much once again to Valerie Boyer, Tiffany Lawson, Tyiesha Radford Schwartz, Donna Marbury, and Ajanaé Dawkins. Thank you again.